Welcome, guys. Uh, I'm Sanjeev Kumar, based out of Chicago. I head Emphasis application management services and testing services that includes our quality engineering and zero QA. As digital transformation is moving ahead with exponentially higher velocity, businesses, technology leaders would like to accelerate business value through zero QA. And we have a fairly esteemed panel with us today. Quick housekeeping rules. Other than the panel members, all attendees are on mute. Your interactive feedback is pretty important. So please post your questions on the chat window. During the session, we'll pick them up towards the end of the call as part of our Q&A session. And if possible, one of the tribe members will also respond to your questions on the chat window itself. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available for offline viewing. Let's hear from a few of these leaders who are pioneers in our journey in terms of taking an agile digital transformation for their respective organizations. Our moderator today is Diego Giudice. Is the principal analyst and vice president with Forrester since July 2005. Diego is a leading expert on software development lifecycle processes and practices, covers topics such as agile development, agile testing practices, tools, DevOps, and software quality engineering. We also have with us our customer partners from Schwab, Mike Schober, managing director at Charles Schwab, is a technology leader with a passion for transforming the way organizations work to a frictionless and repeatable software development practice, and delivering emerging solutions that change the fundamental way people use technology. He's led delivery of Schwab's intelligent portfolios and innovative automated investing platform. Welcome, Mike, and thanks for joining the panel. We have one of our product partners, Sarah Petrie, is the director of partner solution engineering at Sauce Labs, where she works with prospective and new customer partners to create technical enablement and reinforce value for them. While at Sauce Labs, she has partners and customers adapt their tests and frameworks to enhance their parallel and cross-browser testing capabilities. Last but not the least, we have our own Greg Wittenbrook. He's the leader of Emphasis DevOps Tribe, where he works to unlock business value for enabling IT execution through DevSecOps, quality engineering, and SRE. Our panel, I'll hand it over to you, Diego. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. Sorry, I was trying to say hello with my mute button on. Thank you very much for having me here. And yeah, I'm just going to spend really 15 minutes because, as Sanjeev said, we have a great panel here to discuss a few more things with a pragmatic view on how you can actually achieve zero QA, and we're going to be talking about practices and those in a panel that follows my 15 minutes. So what I want to do is I just want to give like a little bit of a background in terms of the trends that I see and some of the practice that I see. And as I said, some of these we will go deeper in with the Q&A that you might be able to ask through the chat, but also through the conversation we're going to have with the panel. The first thing I'd like to just make sure it's clear to everybody is that quality really matters. It is under the scrutiny of executives. These are just extractions of the 10 sec filings 10K SEC filings of companies like Walmart, United Care, and CVS, right? Huge enterprises over there. And you can read, you can just read the sentences by yourself. But really, what it boils down to is that the concern is that if the technology is not working, it's going to have a big impact on the business, on the bottom line, and on the business, right? So quality matters. Now, we couldn't, of course, avoid talking about the pandemic. We were joking about it even before we started this conference among the panelists, and probably we're all sitting home, most of us right now. So, but the pandemic hasn't really slowed down digital. That's it's not just let's say word of mouth. I mean, Satya here was saying this a couple of months back into the Microsoft Build conference to thousands of developers, that really companies are doing what they haven't been able to do in years. They're doing them over in 2 months. Now, whether the quality level and they're doing the right things, that might not always be the case, but the important thing is the mindset seems to have changed, or at least those things that were an impediment because there was some mental block for doing them, like, for example, working remote, working distributed, and collocated being a must, has kind of have been demystified with the pandemic. And so basically, we talk a lot in Forrester about adaptive delivery, because that's what really matters for digital transformation, what accelerates digital transformation. And that means agile done at the teams level, modern application, modernizing the way we build software, we test software, we deploy software at the team level, but also at the enterprise level. And it is and so basically there are 6 major drivers that we see organizations work on to make that modernization happen, right? It's working on the cultural aspects, it's working on working and nurturing great talent, it's on the structure, the way we organize teams and how we organize in pipelines and value streams, the metrics that are used, the processes, and the technology. And what really and enables digital transformation at the end of the day, the kind of the delivery engine is not just agile, it's agile plus DevOps, right? And I like talking to both that way because they are two sides of the same coin. On one side, you can see that agile tears down the wall between business and developers, and it's like driving that whatever your preferred best racing driving car is. It's like the experience is like having driving that car, enjoying the experience with great quality and with speed, of course. But guess what? That won't work if you are not running on comfortable roads with grip and security, right? With a proper infrastructure. And so while agile tears down the wall between business and developers, what DevOps does, it tears down the wall between development and operations, and therefore now you have really end-to-end agility or an adaptive delivery. But DevOps, in addition, of course, forces organizations to also, in order to serve the agile teams, provide a more scaled infrastructure, right? The analogy again with the driving system here and cars is that if you get close to a huge city, you need to have a proper scaled infrastructure to get off from a 6-lane freeway without being hurt. And what's important is the communication, the language, the common language between developers and ops. Just as there is a common language between those that drive cars and those that build roads and infrastructure, we all have to understand and have an understanding on the same language, because otherwise, I could easily get off the main road by not understanding the signs. And so with Agile and DevOps, the shared language, common goals is very key and very important. So what about testing? Right? You might say, well, Diego, you've spent 5 minutes and you haven't yet mentioned testing. Well, actually, I started off with making sure that we all understand the importance of relevance of quality in organizations. And well, guess what? Testing is actually the pulsing heart of all of this, because we can't do what we preach to do. It's not just about speed. It really is about speed at quality. Or quality at speed, sorry. So it's about having speed with quality. We can't just speed up things, deploy things faster, but not deploy the right things, or not deploy things that are from a qualitative perspective, have great customer experience, run, don't break, don't and things that don't break the systems and don't break into production. Now, of course, if that's the role of testing within Agile and DevOps, it's obvious that we can't keep doing what we've been doing for years, right? Testing cannot be an afterthought. Testing can't be done totally manually, right? We're going to have to change things. We're going to have to change many things. And that I've been writing myself about continuous testing. Actually, I coined that term few years back, quite a few years back. If you read some of my old research of 4 or 5 years ago, I defined what I meant by continuous testing. And this was the picture that I used to explain it, right? So what it means is, it means that you have to start testing from the very beginning, right? During ideation planning phase, during design build, during the, when you integrate and when you deploy, and use also testing to kind of collect feedback from production and leverage that feedback to improve quality. So it's testing done early, often, automatically, and continuous. And so what does that mean, right? This is kind of a summary of the practice. It really means that you have to change many things, right? It means you have to change and adopt new practices. It means you have to change the way you organize teams. The roles of testers change. The metrics that we use change, and the technologies have a big place in this as well, because at the end of the day, if you want automation is all about technology, but also, leveraging and using API testing more than we've been doing in the past. It means also layering or integrating everything you do about testing in a CI/CD pipeline with version control, so that you can version automation and actually enable automation better. You can use some specialized services like service utilization to simulate very complex environments and be able to test things quickly, spin up test environments quickly with with cloud and strip them up and build the test environment down, and test data management, right? All of this can't happen without using and leveraging the proper test data. Now, so it's practices, it's organization, it's technology. And there's something else also happening, which is that technology is infused also with some of the latest, greatest, paradigms that are out there, like AI and machine learning. So what I mean about new practice, some of these that you see here is, well, adopting things like test data driven development or behavior driven development. It means shifting left. You remember that little Moebius, it meant testing is going to start right away, and it doesn't mean just unit testing done well. It means literally working with the product owner and business, starting to find test cases and test requirements very early on and implementing them right away during sprint. It means also monitoring the production environment and having that visibility early on inside the development team. It means replacing as much as possible manual testing with exploratory testing for the manual testing that remains and that we can't and we don't want to automate necessarily. It means, from an organizational perspective, embedding people in teams, federating, having a federated structure, but I'm going to focus on a few things of these a little bit more in depth in the last 5 minutes that I have. Of them is around that organization that I talked about. So basically, there's different ways organizations are trying to scale Agile. One of them that's becoming very popular is using the organic organization of Spotify, which is made of tribes, of chapters, of guilds and squads. What's really behind that model is it's basically having these cross-functional or integrated product teams that we can call squads, which are basically focusing on getting work done, right? They're focusing on getting the services, the products done. And you might have more squads in a tribe if you have a large product or a program. And so basically tribes and squads focus on managing work. While on the other hand, you also have in those squads, everybody that is part of a squad is part of a chapter team. And the chapter teams are focusing on how the work gets done. It defines the best practices, defines and nurtures the culture of the squad members. Now, and so basically these, it's kind of a matrix organization, but you can see how the know-how gets spread around the organization, because when all the testers of a chapter, of a testing chapter, for example, regain together, they're coming from different squads and they're bringing back what they learned in those teams. They share that information, and when they go back to the squad teams, they will bring that knowledge back. So it kind of scales that way in terms of sharing quality, and also these teams are all sharing, common goals and common metrics and so forth. The reason why this is important is most modern engineering teams are organizing as integrated product teams, not necessarily using, the tribes and, the tribes and the Spotify model, but there's also other models out there like SAFe and release trains and so forth. But the concept behind all of these is really having these self-autonomous integrated product teams. An impact on testing, right? So testing is, for example, in an organization like that, you will have a chapter on testing, and you will have each tester or testers part of the squads, but you might also still have a center of excellence. You might have still, a test data management center of excellence, which is different from a chapter because it's more of a team of super experts, and you've got few of them that are consulting to the rest, right? They're not part of the teams, embedded in the teams. They're consulting to the teams, and that might be for performance. It could be for end-to-end, RPA test automation. And then you've got the concept of guilds, which I don't really talk much about, but they're important too. They're more informal. They're more really communities that focus around a topic area. So you can have enterprise testing guilds that help people share everything they know about testing or something specific in the testing areas across tribes, right, across the entire organization and so forth. But the whole point is, I'm not suggesting this is the only way, testing needs to get structured, but it's definitely getting away from what we were used to, which was a huge, 200-300 test center of excellence, as we've been doing in the past. Test center of excellence are really decreasing. Big centralized testing teams are not the trend anymore. Another thing I wanted to quickly touch on is developers. We all think developers should be taking on testing. We keep betting on the fact that we will have D-testers or test developers or developers themselves that test. The reality is really they're doing some of that. You can see the percentage of how many of them spend what amount of hours on the different types of automation. And when I ask this question from 1 to 4 hours, you can see that it hasn't changed between 2018 and 2019. But also when you look at the data, this is close to the 1 hour, not to the 4 hours. So if it was 4 hours, it would be great. We would be doing a lot of testing. We probably wouldn't need to do more than what the developers are doing, maybe doing functional testing with API testing and so forth. But that's not happening. And so really, my conclusion on this is always, and people smile to this, but it's really true. Developers, either are neutral to testing or they hate it. And when they don't, they might be just, testing the happy paths, right? They don't have the approach that a good tester would have in really trying to figure out where the business problem to test the areas that have high business criticality, perhaps. So can AI change anything on this? AI can, and AI is. It's being used and leveraged more and more. We're early days still. And so, in a nutshell, I have much more research around this, but the takeaway for the little time I have here, and maybe if the guys on the panel have more experience and what they're doing around this would be great to know and hear. But basically, AI can augment not just, it basically is there to augment testers, right? Not to replace them, but to augment them with intelligence. We talk about intelligence augmentation, and that's what it happens in the testing world, but not just the developer testers, which, an AI can help them decide how much of you help them generate unit tests very quickly, or execute which ones are the tests to be executed next. Also, the technical testers, can be augmented, as well as the business testers, because AI makes abstracts away the complexity at a high level. So you can use, for example, natural language processing for defining test cases. Well, we're starting to do that, or help us understand and cluster defects so that we know that a bunch of type of defects can be fixed by certain types of skills, and it helps us improve mean time to repair. And so it's augmenting testers' intelligence at all levels: the developer tester, the technical tester, and the business tester. The last thing around those 12 must-dos are just a note on the metrics. Testing is, so quality is basically a very important leading indicator for business value. These Agile and DevOps teams, as we saw in that figure when I was trying to talk about adaptive delivery going from business all the way to deployment, it's because we want to also be tied to generating business value, right? And that can be through net promoter score, sales revenue increase. There's different ways of measuring business value, but you want to use these metrics. Quality is part of them, pre-production metrics, post-production metrics, but the trick is using the metrics in a combined way, having a dashboard so that we are improving speed, but at the same time, we're improving speed, getting better business value, and with high quality. We just don't want to improve speed for the sake of improving speed. Okay, so I took a few more minutes that I should have. It's just 1 minute more, but that was just like, I'm just kind of, being an icebreaker for what we're going to be discussing, this and other topics now, moving to the panel. And if we have any questions, we can answer those questions at the end. So, all right. So, well, first of all, thank you. I want to thank the panel for accepting and being on this with me. So basically, let me start with Michael. Michael, could you share with us what's the state? I mean, I gave a general picture, right, of what I see in the industry, but could you share what you're doing in Charles Schwab, and what you've reached so far in terms of becoming more of a mature, modern testing organization? What practices you're using, anything of those that I mentioned, or things that I didn't mention that you instead are doing and are being very successful with it?
Yeah, I think I can talk about two levels as well. And Diego, I think you're right on with the DevOps discussion. And I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing and what we're doing at Schwab at that level. But starting at kind of a micro level, when I was on Intelligent Portfolios, I've moved to an enterprise role now, but we actually did shift left starting back in 2017. And we were calling it shift left with a focus on quality and mostly reduced cycle times, which we mostly achieved both of them at a team level. We did at the time reduce our manual QA footprint to 0 in the first half, early part of 2018, and continued to iterate on that over time. What the strategy was back then and starting to be realized now in the SIT team is, there's a mix. There's a mixed bag with developers. Some didn't want to do it. Some loved it, doing automation. And what we saw is if you look at what automation code really is it's code at the end of the day. And a lot of times we don't treat automation code, if it's in a separate QA team, as if it were code. It's not version controlled. It's not tested. It's not validated. It's just assumed that it's a black box. It's not, it's kind of subpar code. We're not going to worry about it as developers. What we did is elevated that automation code to the developer level. We treated it at the same level as feature code that was going to our customers, because we figured if you're going to use code to test your feature code, it better be as good or better than the feature code. And that actually improved the quality of the automation. We brought in tools like Sauce Labs, for example. Our test runs used to take 8 hours. No developer is going to run an 8-hour automation run very frequently. With developer-driven automation and then automation tools that we were not managing on site, which was another big change, the automation runs went from about 8 hours to about 15 minutes. What that changed was when and how often the developers were running that. And then what also started to occur in other teams, like in our digital space, is they started doing testing, and SIP was doing it, but more tightly with full regression. But what the digital team started doing is they started running headless tests when they checked their code in as part of their pull request. So that greatly improved their quality. And at the time, the focus was really around quality and cycle time. What it really transitioned to over time was risk mitigation going into production, because you're mitigating a risk by testing. It's less about improving your quality, but you're really mitigating your risk to your clients and to the company.
Mm.
But now at the micro level, teams were doing this and are doing this individually, and they still are today. So there's areas of success and some that are not as successful. There's no unifying force around it. Now at the enterprise level, and then Diego, you had some questions about the 12 points. Yes, we are doing a lot of the new practices, not around the new organization, other than really starting to look at forming teams that are holistic. So you don't have the, hey, I'm the tester and I'm the developer and I'm the PO, I'm going to throw it over the wall, and then you're going to have that back and forth, because that actually literally does waste time in the overall cycle. And that was one of the biggest things by unifying the teams that allowed us to reduce our cycle time in the early days of the SIP transition by about 10 days per release. That was pretty dramatic. And other teams have been able to do that with even more advanced techniques than we did in SIP. But still, it's not unified. And then there's the overall delivery pipeline at Schwab, which is a focus area that I'm on right now, that we're really looking at. It's really more along the DevOps, but it's really all about automating as much as possible. And our CTO said, automate everything from code check-in to production. So it really gets into DevOps, but even more automation, and removing any manual release management, any manual operational roles, and getting that all the way to production in an automated fashion. And we literally submitted the strategy last night for review. But that includes, inside of those pipelines, consistent automation, whether it's written by a QA, an SDET, or a developer, something that's consistent. Another area that we saw that's really starting to mature right now, and that's more around the AI and ML, so 8 and 9 in the 12 points. The SIP team has done some automation with a tool that is not handcrafted automation, because the developers started to get tired of handcrafting automation. So they did get tired of that. It took more time using Ruby or Java, or whatever language you're using. This is more of it's not a record and playback, but it's an AI ML based tool that allows them to more quickly automate. So the developers are enjoying that tool. Some of the stats that have come out of that team is that the time to create the automation using the new tools compared to manually, the AI ML based tools as compared to manually automating, they've reduced their automation creation time by about 80%. Their mean time
Is that in-house tool developed?
No, that's an external tool.
Okay.
Yep. So, and then the mean time to resolution of bugs has been reduced by 85%. And then the satisfaction rating across the development team and the POs has gone up by, and these are real stats, 104%. So there's real statistics that show that if you start to migrate towards more intelligent automation tools and capabilities, the benefits are definitely there. There's no question about it. We're seeing it. Other organizations are probably going to start looking at that, but we do have the stats. And then another team has also used the same technology and has been able to automate their entire suite, I think, within about 3 months. So very, very dramatic change in technologies.
Sounds like, if I look at the industry overall, that sounds like a very mature, place you guys are. Lucky to be there.
In pockets.
In pockets, of course, right. So, well, let's move on to Greg. So, you being part of a company like Mphasis, who provides services to your clients, I guess you had to go through your own transformation, because usually that's where you learn also how to scale and do it. And so what did Mphasis do to transform itself to kind of be able to deliver more agile DevOps and continuous testing services? What changes have you made?
Sure. So just like our customers, it's a continuous journey, right? So we started certain things and we continuously solicit input and improve that. So one thing we've always done is we're very account centric, meaning we have a good outside in kind of mentality of how we approach the thing. And so that's been very helpful as we've gone through these other changes, to get quick feedback, to be market driven on the types of things we do. And then what we've done recently, so this in the last couple of years, is we've also moved our own internal organizations into the Tribe Squad model. So our go-to-market now, so my DevOps, you see, I'm the DevOps tribe leader, right? So, what we've done now is have combined within that, the sales, solutioning, execution, and delivery all into one tribe. Say, how do we do this better for our customers? and help us evolve it and kind of treat that as a product that we can evolve and deliver on. The other part, which also aligns with your story, is from a DevOps perspective. That's the label we picked. But for us, DevOps is really, we picked that label in part because it implies all the different parts of your organization working together, right? DevOps was initially started to break down the barriers between development and operation. And some of it was looking at the disincentives, the different incentives that the different parts of the organization have, to speed the code versus stabilize the environment. And we said, well, really, that's what we want to do for our entire IT value stream. So really, from our perspective, DevOps is everything about improving the way IT executes in order to deliver and increase business value. So that includes Agile, it includes SRE, it includes testing, it includes, of course, the traditional DevOps thing, and bring them all like to make sure then that we can increase our speed, agility, and business value. Likewise, we're seeing an evolution in metrics. Right? You talk a little bit about that. One of the things, so for example, is when we talk about wanting to improve those core values, what we see is most of our customers do not actually measure their increases in speed or agility. They still do localized metrics. So they have quality metrics, for example, that are focused on catching bugs and stuff like that, but not necessarily looking at it from the perspective is how are we helping the organization deliver code faster and those sorts of things. So likewise, we're looking at how do we certainly with our customers, what are the right metrics that they should be using to help them improve. But we've done a lot of work recently in looking how we do that, and COVID's also made that bigger, right? Because not only do we have to look at how do we improve these processes, how do we do a delivery, how do we build dashboards to show how well we're effectively helping our customers do that, but also how do we do that in this kind of new distributed world and things like that. Talent continues to be a challenge, right? And so we've done a lot. We have this platform we call Talent Next, which is really around how do we make sure we build the types of skills that we need to do this. As we talked about, we have a lot more T-shaped resources, and we're putting people on cross-functional teams, and your skills, even if you're going to stick with traditional QA skills, now we're blending them into development teams, and how they react and stuff is different. We want them to get closer to the code still, so that they can sit there and help us identify technical debt in the code and how to remediate it and things like that. I'll touch on one more point because I'm probably eating up my time. And the AI thing, we're seeing both AI from the perspective of how do we use it to improve what we do, but we're also seeing AI and ML models and other new types of architecture, event-driven systems and things that them the data-driven applications that are producing new challenges in quality, new challenges from a DevOps, and how do we do all of those things? So we're having to broaden what our solutions looks like as some of these new emerging things come up. For example, we acquired Stelligent, which is a best-of-breed cloud engineering thing to really beef up our ability in the cloud space, which is obviously critical these days. And we're building and playing around and have some ML solutions we've already built. So in some cases, if you're working with like a brownfield application and your code coverage is really low, we build tools that can help us to expand and increase code coverage, for example, using ML. We have tools to help us analyze our applications to figure out where it would be the most effective places to test. So we have things like that. We have another one called Cognitive Solution that helps us make sure that we're picking the right test when you deal with products that might have many configurations, and you need to make sure you know which solutions to test. And then, of course, we're working with our customers on their solutions. Again, some of the things like Michael was talking about in terms of some of the tools that help us build and maintain our test cases and things like that as well. And we'll certainly be doing more of those sorts of things in the future.
All right. Well, thanks, Greg. Sounds like you've done a lot of homework yourself, but doing that together with clients as a consulting company would correctly do, I would say. Sarah, to you finally. Sorry, we probably should have started with Sarah, right? This is I did things the wrong way around. But anyway, Sarah, SourceLab is a well-known testing tool vendor in the market, and And so you've got lots of experience in working with developer testers and with developers, I would say, as well, perhaps. What's your feeling? I mean, is there a way we can incent developers to do more testing? Or do you think there's an opportunity for democratizing testing more so that we don't need just developers? As you know, there's this citizen developers world that's growing where basically you've got people on the business side using low-code tools or easy to use tools so that we don't need the developers, right? That's the claim. What's your thought in the testing world about that?
Sure, yeah. In terms of incenting developers to do more testing, Mike brought up some great points in terms of the initiatives that Schwab took or the steps that Schwab took in order to encourage that sort of adoption. But the truth is that even the developers who are more open to it aren't clamoring to step outside of their IDEs or anything like that. So meeting them where they are is going to be the crucial first step. And that can mean literally by being in their IDEs, and a little more figuratively in allowing them to use the technologies that they have already chosen to utilize. The traditional vendors in, a few 5, 10, 15 years ago in the QA space took an approach that was much more, it forced a lot more vendor lock. And it also forced a practice which we don't like, which is choosing a tool and then that tool defining your process. And how you did things really did depend on those tools. So that's not going to go over really well with the developers who are already being asked to go out of their way and essentially add additional workload. Once upon a time, again, when these vendor lock tools were still more prevalent in the market, they got away with it because the devs didn't have as much of a voice. One thing that we were seeing even before COVID became prevalent, or before the pandemic hit, and now we're seeing it accelerate, is that the QA organizations are the groups that were hit when enormous rounds of layoffs were being seen across the board, especially in some of the harder hit industries. But what resulted was the devs not only were able to stick around, but in often extra headcount were given to that, because as we know, the digital presence of any company was so heavily relied upon, or has been and continues to be so heavily relied upon in these past few months and going forward. So the devs now have more of a voice than ever because they are being asked to step into roles and that they maybe haven't been before. And now they've got this voice, they've got power and decision making. They, in many situations, we've gone into accounts where for years we worked with the QA teams, and suddenly the QA teams aren't even there anymore. So we're now talking to the developers and asking them, well, what would you want from us as the vendor in order to get you to be testing? And there's, again, a lot of a desire for the speed and agility that Mike mentioned. They need to know that their time isn't going to be wasted, that it's going to be efficient and quick and high quality. But so much of it does come back to them wanting to be able to use the tools and the frameworks and the languages that they have chosen. So the key phrase is framework agnostic. And so again, the traditional tools, framework agnostic is not something that could have been applied to really any of them. And there are still a lot of tools out there for testing that aren't going to be agnostic. I know Sauce Labs is making a concerted effort to gain even more a higher level of agnosticism when it comes to frameworks, so that we can meet those developers exactly where they are and facilitate that.
Okay.
The democratization of testing, now it's a really interesting point, because we want so much for there to be that shifting left for the developers in the earliest possible stages to be testing the code, and then again for it to be continuous. But when you think about it, it can't be continuous if only the devs are doing the testing. And what we have also traditionally seen in QA as a space is that if you silo testing into a certain group, then it very quickly becomes seen as a bottleneck by other groups. So as much as you can democratize testing where it's relevant, where it makes sense, then you instead create a place where there's accountability across the board. It's built into every step of the process, every step of the pipeline. It's done really continuously, and so the coverage is increased and the visibility is increased, and again, that accountability. so that at the end of the day, you end up with an organization that has a culture that embraces and all has a stake in the quality. And the continuous testing is crucial to that.
Yeah, so I guess, I liked your point about the developers where, us asking too much out of them. I mean, think about it, right? Performance testing is also shifting left, and we're telling them, well, developers can do performance testing early on. We're turning them into superheroes, I guess. But that's a conversation we could have another day, I guess, on the future of developers with AI and machine learning, by the way, which is also going to change the way we build code. But anyway, so all right, well, I'm going to do another round. I'm going to ask you guys to be a little bit shorter if you can in the answers. Mike, I'm going to be back to you again. I mean, actually, you're doing some really cool stuff with those, with your teams. I'm wondering, could you talk about the metrics? How you're measuring, if somewhat you're tied to business value? I mean, you talked about being, risk, helping to manage risk, which is important. How are you measuring, right, the outcomes of your teams that and how are and how the contribution to those important, lagging metrics? How is that happening?
Well, I'll start by saying that Schwab is not very mature in this space. I think Gregory said it, so I'll use his term, but it's localized. The teams have localized metrics and they're not consistent. So if you're going towards a release, the automation testing could be as slick as possible, but the outputs are still manual release management, manual email, chain of approvals before things go to production. So this is an area that needs improvement at Schwab. But most of the localized metrics are really around quality. How many escapes do you have? How many bugs do you have before you go to production? What's your cycle time? How fast is your automation? The POs the POs and UAT are not really a key part of it, even though they should be. But as you talk about democratization, we kind of look at the POs should be able to do automation as well. So there's tools and capabilities that should allow them to do automation, whether it's further up or shifting right. But I did mention there's a strategy that I'm working on around delivery pipeline. That's an area of focus. So observability all the way through the pipeline, transparency and visibility. So value stream management, being able to track things in an automated way, in an audited way, to eliminate manual steps and eliminate email chain of approvals. So that is in flight. Our strategy is in progress. Our key metrics, we are going to go back to primarily using DORA as a key metric for us across the teams. So there is capabilities, and now I'm kind of stepping out of automated testing a little bit, but that will track a lot of that for you as you automate your pipeline.
Is that for kind of a benchmarking purpose, to compare from a benchmarking perspective, or?
Yeah, the key is really to have more of a single pane of glass of where deployments, including automation. So tools and capabilities for automation need to slot into this pipeline via templates, and then the outputs is automated. So it's more of a single pane of glass for all levels of the hierarchy. So your first line of defense managers through your VPs, SVPs, even up to our CIO.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Sarah, again, back to you. This time I'm going to promote you to the next, just to kind of give you back the word and not have you wait too long again. So what are you seeing in terms of, or what evolutions are you thinking of in terms of the testing as being a testing tool vendor in the space of the metrics, if any? And you guys run lots of testing in the clouds. There's lots of data there. Are you, what are the plans of on how to leverage that data? Is there anything cool that you see coming?
Sure. Yeah, there are some things that we are actually doing right now that are already available to our customers, and then there's of course what's being talked about for next, and then even further beyond that. But you're right. So in your presentation, you spoke so much about quality and how testing is so crucial to that, and there's absolutely no denying that. But also, what really ties into that is the quality of your testing. And we have, as part of what we do at Sauce Labs, is our enterprise customers have customer success managers who present back to those accounts their continuous testing benchmark is what we call it. And so we give back to them. We tell them about the quality of their test runs, what the percentage of platform is, the different OSs and the different browser versions or devices, their pass-fail scores, all these various things, as well as the overall test execution time and the average of that. And a lot of these play into what we would call the quality of these tests. So in the end, if you're doing continuous testing, but your testing practice is very poor and your results aren't actually reliable, it's just a box that you're checking. There's no value in that. You can't say that, oh, well, we ran hundreds and hundreds of tests, so we can release with confidence. That's obviously not necessarily the case. So a lot of what we are able to do as a vendor is give back the data that our customers are kind of giving us just by running their tests on our platform. And so we have things like a failure analysis module in the web interface that searches your tests for patterns, test failure patterns and errors that help you understand, well, are these tests failing because of the application, or are they failing because of this flakiness that I can now diagnose and rectify? And as you do that, as you're able to diagnose, you can make your tests more resilient, make your automation code of a higher quality so that the results are of a higher quality and are more valuable to you then.
Wonderful.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, was you going to say something else?
I was going to speak just a little bit about what's some of the things that are coming next. I can do it in about a minute and a half.
Go ahead. No worries.
A lot of what we're talking about now is we get asked constantly for breadth of coverage for, what additional devices can we support? And it's tempting to go down a very tactical road like that. But what we're more focused on is the intelligent aspects that we've already spoken about a bit, and how can we take testing to a place it's never been before that will add value to the industry across the board. So there's a lot of looking at how can we create that continuous testing, how can we use technology to tap into what should we be testing, what is of the highest priority, so that if time is short for testing or you really need to be picking and choosing the priorities, what the most critical areas are, and there are technology and real user monitoring that could potentially play into that, as well as, again, those conversations with the products you mentioned.
Okay, fantastic. Greg, one more thing from you. So you probably work with many clients as a company. Of course, you've got clients all over the world. Could you give us an idea, if you look at the portfolio of your clients, how many of those fall into a beginner stage? They're just starting to transform and modernize their application development and delivery and testing, of course, versus those that are more mature and have maybe between 30 to 50% of their teams that are working in this new way, versus others that have even more than 50%, the third bucket of the advanced guys. I mean, I ask this because, lots of people are probably listening, they hear all this cool stuff. And I think, sometimes when you look at the industry where it is, you'll find a situation that might be somewhere in between what people, tell us at conferences, for example. That was for Greg, sorry. Is Greg here?
Yeah, so obviously the most advanced companies do most of the writing, so that certainly shifts the perception a little bit. I think I would answer it like this. So we still have a high percentage of our customers who are still in traditional ways. Almost all of them, though, are starting to have the conversation about how do we start adopting these modern and have these done some work. Yeah. Beyond that, I think Michael said it, right? We're good, excellent in pockets. Yeah, every customer is really good at some piece of this, right? We have many customers who are delivering excellent quality while doing very few of these modern practices, but they may be doing it very slowly. So if I had to go from a percentage thing, I would say, we still probably have about 25 of our customers that are almost completely traditional still. We probably have about 65% or so that are, somewhere in the middle. And we probably only have 5 to 10% that would be advanced. But more often what we'll see is, sometimes if we're doing a cloud or zero code implementation or greenfield thing, we might have a customer that overall is in the intermediate but has some spots where, we might be doing very advanced implementation. So it's a little all over the map.
Right. Yeah, I think it's actually a tricky question because exactly as Mike is a great example is organizations have pockets of all three things, right? Of those that are just beginning, those that are somewhere in the middle, teams, and other parts of the organizations that are well advanced. Michael talked about value stream management. Organizations are innovating on a value stream basis, and so they pick the value streams and they come in an iterative and agile way, which I think is right. You can't transform big bang. It has to be done, even the transformation in an agile way. Okay, so I'm going to just look at a couple of questions from the feed, and then I will have one last question that hopefully you can all three get to answer at the end. So one question is for you, Mike. Could you share what the name of that tool that is using and leveraging AI and ML that your developers are having fun with?
Yeah. The tool is Mabel. So it's a company based out of Boston. I actually onboarded it with Intelligent Portfolios back in 2018. But it's, like a lot of tools in that space, it wasn't very mature. I started working with them when they were still pre-GA. But they have matured and brought in some capabilities that make them more viable for a company like Schwab and less of a vendor lock-in at this point in time. But there's about 3 teams using it right now, and they've all found a lot of success on it.
I know them well. They're in my wave too, my functional test automation wave. That's cool. So there's a question here that came to me, but I think I'll share it with the panel as well. I mentioned shift left and shift right, and I guess probably the terminology is sometimes it says as a new practice, and says what practices falls under each because they sound like contradictory. Well, I'll tell you what I think, and eventually anyone wants to add, that's fine too. So what I mean with shift left is testing starts early on, and it's as I said, early stages, not just enforcing unit testing, but even before we'll start writing code, testers sit down with the product owners. We're in an agile sprint, and so very early on, test cases or user acceptance criteria or whatever BDD user scenarios, whatever approach is used, starts basically in parallel with the requirements and then with the coding, right? So that's the shift left. And it's it's actually not even invented here or from Agile. This is true even from the ITSQ, the standards, ITM standard of testing had this concept. The shifting right is more, maybe it's not correctly called shifting right, but what it means is leveraging and monitoring. That used to be a job done only in operations, and now it's actually it's leveraging the information that we have at the right end at the deployment side earlier on in the development lifecycle. Maybe that could be seen also as a shift left, but behind the definition of shift right, what it really means is testing in production, A/B testing, monitoring, those type of practices. Anyone wants to add anything?
Yeah, so we're certainly having more conversations with customers about shift right. It's not always called that, and certainly testing and production scares some people. But yes, I think it's about reducing the risk of your deployment, right? So I want to be able to do things like canary releases, for example, and change and do some more incremental deployment types. So my deployments are less risky. I want to use monitoring and tools like that. So if something goes wrong in production, I can respond much more rapidly. I need things like automatic fallback. So if during my canary release I see certain thresholds get meet, I can automatically reduce my code. And then of course it also has to do with the shift left, because then it said, part of the reason I can do this is because I can get through the pipeline much faster and fix a problem. So my risk of dealing with production is much lower. And this is also aligned with the future world, which said, look, we're starting to build these event-driven solutions. There's so many, it's not possible to catch everything in quality. So we're going to have to think about how we shift right, because really the measure of what the quality of our system is what the experience of that is in production. And so it needs to be part of the solution. It's just a question of when do we introduce that.
I couldn't have said it better, and it's always great to have a consultant with you. Great, thank you, Gregory. That was very exhaustive and clear. So the last question I have, we only have 4 or 5 minutes left. So I guess we talked about a lot of practices but let's try to boil and simplify it down to the folks that are on the phone. What suggested steps would you recommend for maturing their testing, right? Consider somebody that might be just starting, a beginner scenario, or somebody that's already in the journey and how they can energize it. Anybody wants to give their quick answer to that, and maybe all three of you can. Who starts first? Michael or Greg? You wanted to start?
No, Michael, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I'd say a lot of it is around, it's going to go back to just leadership on a team. Your leadership, whether it's executive or frontline leadership, has to really believe in wanting to do it, but also have the leeway from their leadership to make changes in automation. And then, of course, you need to bring in the right tools. You need to have the right training for your team. As we look at a larger delivery pipeline rollout for Schwab, that's the strategy that I'm working on now. We're really following the Rogers technology adoption curve. We're going to look at teams that are innovators that want to do it and set up reference implementations within those teams, and then build on that and iterate on those reference implementations through early adopters, early majority, et cetera. But we're assuming it's only going to be maybe an 80-20 adoption rate, that there's going to be 20% of teams that literally won't be able to do it and won't want to do it. So I think that's the key thing is iterating on it. Don't try to do a big bang. Start small with innovative early adopters, and then build that across the organization. And take feedback, right? Take feedback. We're going to establish a foundation around this for the organization, so that across the different silos, so that we can take feedback and iterate and reduce risk over time.
All right. Well, I don't know, Sanjeev, do we have a few more? Do we have a few more minutes, or do you need to wrap up the conversation?
We have 1 more minute, Diego.
Okay. Well, Gregory, I saw you wanted to kind of intervene as well. Did you want to add anything to what Michael said?
Yeah. Well, instead of repeating what he said, could I agree with all that? If you're starting new, for greenfield application, this can be a lot easier. And if we're starting with brand new teams of greenfield application, top leadership support, my encouragement is be aggressive. Do a lot of this all at once, and use your continuous improvement to refine it over time, versus if you're overly incremental, then what happens is stuff doesn't happen. 2 is, with that leadership, you need to focus on all of the non-technical aspects of it. The reality is, with the tool vendors like Sauce Labs and Mabel that were described, have made a lot of this easier. We can accomplish speed, we can accomplish cost savings, we can accomplish all of the different things all in parallel, though not all at once necessarily. But fear, uncertainty, and doubt, conflicting opinions of the different stakeholders and things like that tend to kill a lot of these things. You make sure your continuous improvement process is in order. Otherwise, what happens is you'll reach some state, that state will get institutionalized, and it'll be very hard to keep moving forward. And there's always going to, this is a space that's evolving very quickly, and so you don't want to become static in where you are.
Sarah, a quickie from you. What would you add?
Yeah, really quickly, and very much in the same vein as my other panelists, is being aware of trying to overdo standardization, and that's kind of that big bang that Mike was talking about. There's power in letting the teams that are organically moving in a certain direction move in that direction, as long as it's not at odds with the greater strategy. So some of that's in the actual technology, and some of that's again in just how the processes are playing out.
And I'll close this by adding sustainable in the sense of durable. You don't want teams to go back to old habits. All right. Well, thank you very much. Great panel. Sanjeev, back to you.
Thank you, Diego. Thanks a lot, Diego, Michael, Greg, and Sarah. Very exciting conversation. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's session.